So I've just done reading the Portal webcomic, or Portal 2 webcomic, I should say, called Lab Rat. That was recommended to me by Scrub. So thank you very much, Scrub, for the recommendation. And wow, it was quite an interesting read, I thought, overall, because it actually explained the secret rooms that we found in Portal 1 and all of the graffiti on it, or at least I believed it did anyway. In that it actually gave us quite a bit of backstory and a bridge between Portal 1 and Portal 2. In that it actually revealed in the comic who this mysterious person was that was leaving behind all of the graffiti in the secret room. And as far as I was aware, the person's name was called Doug, but I don't know what his surname was. I think it was probably written somewhere in the comic, but I couldn't find it. I sort of skimmed read the comic, to be fair to you, because I've got quite a lot of work on at the moment. So I just sort of went through it quickly. But I got the gist of the story, and I have to say I was quite invested in it. It was very well thought out. I thought the comic art was generally good. It was a bit too pretentious for me in that it was quite, I don't know, some of it was a comic book art. I mean, I don't read a lot of comic books, to be fair. I haven't done when I was younger. Not that because I didn't like comic books, I was just too busy playing video games. I had a very narrow field of entertainment when I was young, and still do to this day, actually. But the art was good, though. I was able to see and figure out what was going on in each panel. And the only reason why I call it pretentious is because sometimes it was a little bit hard to follow what was going on. The left to right convention very occasionally was a bit confusing. But then again, that's just me. I'm not saying that everybody else would have had the same problem. It was just me. I just found it a bit hard to read. But then again, I don't read a lot of comics, like I said before. So, yeah. But other than that, it was still nice art, and I still got it. And the story was really interesting because it explained a bit about GLaDOS's conception, how the computer was made, and the problems that they had in making her, and also that they were trying to create her as one of the first artificially intelligent computers that could think for itself. But it had a problem with that every time they booted her up after like a tenth of a picosecond, I think it was, and eventually they got it to a 16th of a picosecond. It wanted to kill every human being in the science laboratory, which I thought was quite amusing. So yeah, that was a cool. They did find a way to circumvent that, but then it didn't quite work out. But we'll get back to that. But yeah, so this character called Doug, who was a scientist who worked at Aperture, and apparently was part of the development of GLaDOS. I think he seemed to have been doing a lot of work on the turrets and a couple of other things. It might be that he had a hand helping develop GLaDOS, but I'm not sure if he was really behind it. I think he was just working on it. Um, well, he was the person who left all of the graffiti in those secret rooms, and apparently during the playthrough of Portal and the game itself, I mean not just my playthrough but everybody else's playthrough of it, he was alive the whole time. I insinuated that I thought he was dead because of the graffiti he left and all that, and I thought, well, where is he? He's not. Well, even he, it could have been a she at the time, actually. It could have been a lady, not a bloke. Or a man, I should say. Oh, I still can't get my terminology right, although very nice of you guys to say that it doesn't matter what I say in terms of ladies, gentlemen, men, women, girls, boys. I'm still trying to get it right. I will do eventually, don't worry. But thank you very much for being patient and tolerant of me on that one. But anyway, I didn't know if it was a man or a woman, but it turns out it was a man, this Doug character. And he has been observing, I think, or at least he knew about our character called. I don't know if it's called Shell or Chell. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to go with Chell for now. I've been saying Shell before in the past, but CH is a ch sound. So I'm going to say Chell for now. And what's interesting as well is that towards the end of the comic, he actually gets her file and her surname's redacted. Everybody else's test subjects' names. There's like a list of all these test subject names that have gone before us and after us. Actually, no, not in terms of when they've done the test, actually, in terms of IQ. Sorry, the list of people or test subjects were rated in terms of IQ. But yeah, her surname was redacted. There might have been a couple of others that were redacted, but they were like cut off from the rest of the panel of the comic, so I guess it wasn't important. But her name, or our character's name, was cut off. But yeah, he was alive the whole time. Anyway, I'm skipping ahead there. He was alive the whole time, and he was the one who was leaving the messages behind and keeping a track of her. And he also had companion cube with him, or he had a companion cube with him, who he was apparently hallucinating the companion cube's existence, in that there was a dialogue between the two of them to a certain point, but you kind of knew that he'd lost his he'd lost his sanity, basically. Or I say he lost his sanity. He was losing his grip on the reality he was living in and imagining this companion cube. But the dialogue between the two of them was quite interesting in that you could have, it was blurring the lines between him actually being mentally not quite right, and I think GLaDOS actually calls it schizophrenia, which I always get confused with what it actually means. I don't know what schizophrenia actually means. I used to think it was another name for multiple personality disorder, but I don't think it is. I don't know what schizophrenia is off the top of my head. You'll have to let me know in the comments. I think it's to do with projecting another personality outwards from you, and I guess Doug was doing that with the companion cube. I think that's what it might mean. It's something to do with projecting another personality, and then you arguing with it with yourself. I think it's something to do with that. But anyway, it's not the point. You guys can tell me exactly what it's all about. I know you will because you're smarter than me. um, and yeah, it was an interesting dynamic between the two. But he kept the companion cube with him the whole time, or his version of the companion cube anyway, because we had to destroy ours, until he decided to take these tablets. And before he became who he was in the game, when he was a scientist working with another scientist who was working on GLaDOS in the Aperture facility. And incidentally, C. Johnson is actually Cave Johnson, Cave being the C part. So Cave was this person's first name. I think he or she was his boss, or one of Doug's boss, or the superior person in Aperture, like a higher up senior person, senior management or senior scientist figure. I didn't actually detect much about Cave. There's probably a lot more detail in the comic. I just didn't pick it up. But yeah, Cave. There was like one message in a comic panel from Cave Johnson, and apparently it was an automated response saying, "Why are you messing around? You should get back to work," or something along those lines. So yeah, Cave Johnson was, I think, one of the lead administrators of Aperture, if not the lead one. But yes, Doug apparently had pills beforehand, so whether he was a bit mentally insane before what happened at Aperture with GLaDOS, I don't know. But either way, he finds these pills during this comic strip that he's been hiding and saving, and he takes them, and then he stops talking to Companion Cube. He keeps the Companion Cube, but he doesn't have any more dialogue with the Companion Cube. So maybe it's a suppressant to help his mental condition. I don't know, but either way, he takes it, and it's for a while he's not communicating with the Companion Cube until the end when the pills wear off. But yes, I'm sort of going all over the place. I'm very tired, by the way, so I'm very sorry that I'm not making much sense. But yeah, that comic strip overall was really interesting because it basically tracked his journey through Portal 1, watching or at least keeping a track of Chell getting through her events with the testing chamber that we went through. So while we were playing the game, he was watching or keeping a track of us on the sidelines. And during the events that this is happening, it flashes back this comic to when Doug was working with this other scientist on GLaDOS, and it turns out that they were the ones, or at least the one scientist who was working with Doug, or who knew Doug in the facility. They built the I forget what they're called, but they were the things that we blew up on the boss fight with GLaDOS, the little ball things that contained different parts of GLaDOS's personality. Well, this one scientist developed this bot that basically contained a conscious, and his argument was, well, if we install this onto GLaDOS, the conscious will stop her, and I say her again, it's really a computer, so whether it actually has a gender, well, I'm just going to call her for now because of the voice. But yes, I do realise that she's not got a gender specifically, even though I keep referring to her as a she. But anyway, he puts this bot on there, and he believes that this bot that he puts on her, this sort of, I guess, artificial intelligent processor, has this conscious written on it, basically, or a version or a simulation of a human conscious that will prevent her from trying to kill all humans when she boots up, and instead will only be interested in the science because they're building her to improve their science potential, I guess, or it was the next step up. That was it. He refers to Einstein discovering relativity and NASA managing to get to the moon. This is the other scientist talking to Doug. This isn't Doug himself. And he says, well, we've got the hard job now of dealing with artificial intelligence. They've done the easy stuff. We've got the hard stuff. So yeah, their big project was to build GLaDOS. And Doug has reservations about this conscious bot being attached to GLaDOS. He says it won't work because humans can ignore your consciousness. You can ignore your conscience, not your consciousness. Sorry, consciousness means she stays awake. Your conscience. You can ignore your conscience and act without it being a part of your decision. And also, while that's happening, there's references to the Schrodinger's cat experiment, which I remember now was also referenced in a jokey way in Half-Life 2, at the beginning of Half-Life 2, when you meet Dr. Kleiner for the first time in the in the room with Alex, when Alex introduces herself and she saves you at the beginning of the game and then takes you to Kleiner's lab. And there's a little reference when she's having a conversation with Barney or eavesdropping a conversation with Barney and Kleiner, and they mention the Schrodinger's cat thing. So I thought that was quite clever. But in this comic book story, they mention the Schrodinger's cat experiment, which is basically where, and I'm sure you guys already know this, but the experiment is you have a box, and inside the box is a cat, and the cat is exposed to a vial of poison. But the vial of poison can only be broken by the cat, so the cat can break it, I think. And while the box is closed and you can't see what's inside the box, you don't know whether the cat is alive or dead, because you can't see it, you can't measure it, you can't observe it, you don't know. So with this experiment, the idea is that the cat is both alive and dead at the same time in the box, because we don't know otherwise. In other words, it's to do with probability, that the cat can be alive or dead. At the time of before observation, it's both. But the argument is with the experiment is as soon as you open the box up to take a look inside and observe, the act of you carrying out that observation on the experiment, in this case, the act of you carrying out your viewing of the cat in the box, actually influences whether the cat will be alive or dead as soon as you open up the box. And it all comes down to, I think it was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which in physics is where, for example, if you have a box, but this time rather than a cat, you have a lonely particle in there. And let's say this lonely particle is a fundamental particle called an electron, which means it's a particle that you can't break down any further. It's a fundamental building block of life. If you broke this electron, you wouldn't get anything. The electron is like a Lego brick. You know, if you break a Lego brick, you just get bits of a Lego brick. But with an electron, you know, you can't break it. It is effectively an indestructible Lego brick that helps build life with loads of other electrons and other stuff. If you have just one in a box that has nothing else in it, so the box is a vacuum, there's nothing else inside the box other than this one electron, before you observe the electron with radiation, using either visible light or whatever radiation you want to use from the electromagnetic wave spectrum, you can say that for 100% certainty there is an electron in the box. But you couldn't say with 100% certainty exactly where that electron is in the box. You couldn't say, oh, I know in that box exactly the position of the electron, whereabouts it is in space in the box. So the only way you can do that is to observe it. You need to be able to measure it and detect it. And by doing that, you can find it, and therefore you can find its position. So if you find it in the box using radiation, which is one of the most basic and yet most important means of measuring things in physics and indeed in the universe, especially at a particle level, by measuring it and detecting it, you can see it, and then by seeing it, you can find out where it is in the box. But Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says that by doing that alone, by observing the electron in the box, let's say, as opposed to the cat, but same experiment, you interfere with the electron's position. So when you give it radiation, in order for it to emit it back towards a detector, so you can then say, I found the electron because we've emitted some radiation, we've got some radiation back. That tells us where the electron is. By doing that, you give the electron energy, and by giving it energy, providing that it's at a certain energy level, as in you've given it a specific amount of energy, a certain amount of energy, or higher, you move the electron. So basically, although you can detect it with ease, you can blast the box with radiation inside it, and then you'll get a bit of radiation coming back, and that tells you that the electron interacted with that radiation and sent it back. That won't tell you the exact position of where the electron is in the box, because your act of measuring it has actually moved it. So the signal you get back to tell you where the electron is no longer valid. It's actually inaccurate by a certain amount of space, and that certain amount of space is a very, very, very small number. But Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is that you can't measure anything to the accuracy greater than this very small number. And with the Schrodinger's cat experiment, it's a similar thing, except rather than a very small number, you just have the fact that by opening the box up and seeing the cat, you've influenced whether it's alive or dead. But anyway, that was a massive tangent. Getting back to the comic, there's just a reference to this experiment, and GLaDOS wants to do this experiment. As soon as she gets booted up with the conscious bot, she says, I no longer want to kill you. I want to do a science experiment instead. All I need is cats, boxes, your permission, and a little neurotoxin. And apparently the scientists go, okay then, and they give it to her, and then she floods basically the aperture lab with neurotoxin, and she kills all the scientists. All except one, which is Doug, the main character of the comic, and the guy who's been leaving the graffiti notes in the secret rooms, keeping an eye on Chell. Somehow he manages to avoid her, and she's sort of trying to taunt him throughout the means while he's in the lab facility, but hiding, probably where we went at the end of Portal 1. He's he knows that there's another test subject alive or something, and he goes to get her file, which is Chell's file. But while he's avoiding GLaDOS's influence, GLaDOS keeps taunting him and making him go crazy. So it's kind of implied that GLaDOS sent him a bit crazy, hence his attachment to the companion cube, and hence why he can have a conversation with the companion cube via the schizophrenic condition he's in. Although, again, it's stated that he has the tablets beforehand, but whether that was just after the neurotoxin event that killed all the scientists, or whether he had the pills before it all happened, I don't know. It's probably made clear in the comic again, but I didn't read it. That bit, I didn't make sense of that bit. But yeah, and so that's how GLaDOS killed everyone, and how she's got the neurotoxin at the end to try and kill us in the boss fight, which I thought was quite amusing. But basically, it also, the comic, just to summarise this little ramble I've done, the comic summarises the ending of Portal. Now, it turns out through something else that Frederick gave me, which was this I think it was a Half-Life wiki or a Portal wiki. I didn't read all of it in detail, so I'm sorry, Frederick, if you're listening to this. I didn't read all of it in detail simply because there was a lot of information. I just didn't have time. But it was very interesting what I detected. But it turns out from what I got, the gist of it was Portal, when it first came out, it got updated a few times up to 2010, and I believe maybe even up to 2012 as well, or just before it, I think 2011. Whatever. Point being is it received a couple of updates, and these updates made a few changes to the game. One of the updates was that the radios that I got quite attached to with the music, well, apparently there are some radios in the test rooms, in the testing facilities, that you can get access to, some more difficult than others, that have a little red dial on them, or a red light on their dial. And you put if you take this radio with this red light or red dial on it, and you put it in a specific position within the testing chamber, the dial changes from red to green, and it emits this strange frequency, this strange signal. And apparently what it did was it gave you, and I don't know how you got access to it, whether it was in the file coding of the game or some other thing, it gave you these static images of some very, very random things. And apparently if you managed to find all 26 radios and get all 26 weird frequencies, and there was a reason why, the updated description they gave to the game that Valve did was a weird one. It was something like, we've changed all the frequencies of the radio to comply with the United States electromagnetic spectrum rules, or something like that. It was quite a funny update description. But yeah, it had all these static images and stuff, and it was supposed to give you clues as to possibly a sequel to Portal in the form of Portal 2, I think. I don't know, but it gave you some deeper insight into GLaDOS and the Aperture facility at the very least anyway, but it was still cryptic as hell. And then one of the other major updates was they changed the ending of Portal. Apparently the original ending was you floated up, at the end of the boss fight with GLaDOS, you float up into the white ethos. And I think that's where the game ends. You just float up into it. I don't know if you actually appear outside or not, but you just float up at the end. And apparently you're free. The game's ending says that you are free. You're free from the facility. Whether you're alive or not, I don't know, but you're free. And then, excuse me. But in the altered ending from the update, which we experienced in my Let's Play Blind, or when you played the game as well, I'm sure, the ending we got is she's outside, but then you hear a voice saying, thank you for participating in the party volunteering scheme, and you start getting dragged away. And the thing that drags you away is another one of these GLaDOS bots, the same type of bot that had the consciousness of GLaDOS, and indeed the sort of aggressive personality thing that we had, and also the cake recipe bot as well. It was another one of those, and it's dragging us back into the facility. And according to the comic, it actually drags us back and puts us back into a stasis chamber. And Doug notices this, but notices that because of the GLaDOS computer exploding at the end of the first game, it's actually damaged a major part of the facility, and actually damaged the life support system of the chamber that the GLaDOS bot has put us in. So basically, the rest of the comic is him trying to reboot the system up in a way where she stabilizes. And the reason why he's doing it is because she's different. And he said he read something in a file that makes her different, to the point where he actually regains the personality of the companion cube, so his mental health deteriorates again. So he takes these pills, he seems quite normal, and then he starts to deteriorate again. And the companion cube says, well, why is it that Shell is so important? Did she have the highest IQ? Because he had the list of all the testing subjects, and he says no. And then companion cube says, well, has she got high abilities? Has she got some great physical abilities? And he says no. And she says, well, why is she so special? And at the end of the comic strip, Doug does manage to get past the testing chamber rooms full of turrets and stuff. He has to go through all these obstacles, and he gets shot in the end. He gets shot in the leg by a turret, and he's bleeding out. But before he bleeds out, he does manage to get to the life support system. He does something, and it brings it back. So in other words, Chell, in her stasis chamber, her whatever it is, she's alive, and she'll stay alive because he's managed to reactivate the testing chamber's life support. However, he's had to do it in a way where the amount of time that she's in the chamber resting, she's in a total relaxation chamber, I think it was, is indefinite. So basically, he had to do it in a way where, though she's safe and she will be life supported, they don't know for how long, or Doug doesn't know for how long. It could be forever, it could be until something wakes her up. In other words, she's going to be there for a very long time. But he's like, well, it's a small price to pay for keeping her alive. And then he passes out, was about to pass out, but then somehow, with the help of Companion Cube, he gets into another chamber and passes out. Whether he's with life support or not, I don't know. He might die at the end. It didn't make it clear. But at the end, the last panel is of the Companion Cube next to the test chamber, and the files are on the floor that he's dropped that had the details of Chell. And according to this one file page that you see right at the end that has it sort of in plain sight, it has this graph of God knows what. But there's on the graph, it looks like a perfect Gaussian distribution curve. But at the end of it, there's like an error bar and something that says total anomaly. And apparently the reason why Chell is particularly special is because she's got a very, very high stubborn rate. In other words, she's incredibly stubborn and won't give up. And apparently at a very unnatural level. And then right at the bottom of the page it says, do not test her. Reject her as a test subject. Hence why then we were able possibly then to get through the Portal game, because you know, as a video game player who wants to beat the game, your stubbornness to keep playing the game till you've beaten it is your own, and the file was kind of reflecting that. So although Chell is her own character, she's also us at the same time, because they haven't given her completely, at least I don't know because I haven't played Portal 2 yet, and I can't remember that much of Portal 2. She hasn't been given her own identity yet properly. She's got some identity, but we're part of it. So it was really clever. I really liked it. But I thought the whole comic overall, I thought it was really good. I think it was very interesting, and I liked the background information about the birth of GLaDOS. I just couldn't believe that, you know, the one scientist said, Doug said even, sorry, oh, don't put the consciousness bot on her. It's not going to work, because even though it might install a consciousness in her, which is another part of human intellect, like I said, or human identity, humans can beat it, which she does, which is clever. But how the scientists could be so dumb to think about that, I don't know. But then I suppose maybe that comes down to the realms of deep philosophy. I know science is natural philosophy and comes from, it's a derivative of philosophy, but maybe, I don't know, maybe they just took a gamble and thought it would work. Maybe they did other calculations and maybe they just didn't figure out that GLaDOS could circumvent it. Who knows? Either way, I was always a bit. As soon as I read that, I thought, yeah, you should listen to Doug. I agree with Doug. You need to build more of a security system than just a consciousness and a bot. Although it's quite an accomplishment in itself, you need to do more than that. So yeah, but whatever. That was the only bit where I was like, yeah, I agree with Doug. You really need to do more than that, but whatever. But everything else I thought was great. I thought it was a lovely, lovely linking story to Portal 2, and it's now set at Portal 2 because that's how it wraps up the ending of Portal 1. And I know at the beginning of Portal 2 you wake up back in the test chamber again, but I've forgotten everything else after that. Yeah, it's a good linking story, and I'm glad I read it. So thank you very much, Scrub, for recommending it, and I'm sure Frederick would have done the same as well, and maybe even you guys, Game Boy 8, Hidden Windshield, and all that. And I know I'm just naming a few of you, but those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head for now. So forgive me, everyone included as well. Thank you very much for all the recommended information. Thank you again for your viewership for the Let's Play series for Portal, and I believe it's probably my most successful one because although it hasn't got the most views, it certainly had the most positive response, and it certainly had a lot of comments from you guys, and you've given me so much support and said you really enjoyed it, and you really thought it was a good Let's Play Blind, a quick one and immersive, and also because I solved some of the puzzles in unconventional ways, which I didn't do on purpose. That was just how I figured it out. Um, it made you amused and tickled you a bit, so I'm very glad that it did. So I hope then, with the beginning of Portal 2, which will be the next Let's Play Blind, and yes, I will be still playing it in tangent with Opposing Force, so it'll be between Portal 2 and Opposing Force. It'll be just as enjoyable as the Portal Let's Play Blind, or even more. We'll find out. I don't know. But either way, until then, thank you very much for listening to this if you have. Thank you again, Scrub and Frederick, as well, for recommending me all the background information. That doesn't spoil Portal 2 or anything, but just sets it up for it. It was very interesting. And I hope to see you in the next video. So take it easy, guys. Have a good one. I hope you're all well, and have a good one.